The primary work, obviously, that we have from Christine de Pizan is the Book of the City of Ladies. She wrote this in, it came out in 1405, a few years after she had started writing poetry, and her position in the court, while we don't know a lot, seems to have developed a little bit. She had some bragging rights. She had some establishment. She had built a relationship with the queen. So here in this book, she's trying to lay out an argument because she had been around the court for a long time now. She is about 30 years old. She is very well educated, and she has been watching the people who are supposedly, the cream of their civilization, the highest educated people in the land. She had been seeing them up close for quite some time, hearing what they say, reading what they write, and thinking about the arguments they make for why she, as just a little woman, why she was just not worth considering in a lot of different ways. She chooses a kind of it's a well-established genre of this kind of dream vision, where I woke up one day and I saw an angel standing over me, and he explained to me the ways of the world. You see this in a lot of literature from not just this period, but honestly the whole Middle Ages. The most popular being probably a writer named Boethius, writing something called The Consolation of Philosophy, where it was a personified version of Lady Philosophy, an allegorical personification of the field of study of philosophy, coming and explaining the proper perspective one should have in life. For her purposes, she picks out three figures. Lady Reason is part of, for part one, Lady Rectitude and Lady Justice. And they will all explain different aspects of how the world works, so to speak. The gist of her argument is that men have been complaining about women and talking trash about them for a long time. And a lot of our culture at that time, and arguably today, is infected with those basic biases and assumptions that just get handed down generation after generation, spoiling the chance for any actual fair assessment of what women can do or be. She is not making a specifically feminist argument here, saying women can do everything that men can do and should be entitled to all the same opportunities. She's not really saying that. A lot of people today will go to her and say, "Oh, wow, this is going to be great," and then they read it and they're a little disappointed that she's not all for throwing off the shackles of male superiority or whatever. What she's arguing for, however, is a kind of equality before God. Her particular point is that male writers have been assuming that women are awful and perpetuating that lie. throughout the culture. So she wants to take that on. And she uses this gimmick of, I fell asleep and when I woke up, there were these three figures standing over me. And then we had this little discussion that somehow all got written down. The form of the discussion will seem at times like legal testimony. There's argument going on here. There is a kind of Socratic method in evidence where Christine herself as a figure in there is playing a kind of devil's advocate and saying, but yes, all of these great philosophers of the past, people like Aristotle, artists like Ovid, contemporary writers like this guy I was just reading, Matthiolus, they all agree women are awful. And these are really smart guys. So why wouldn't I believe them? Which serves up a nice softball for Lady Reason to step up to the plate and hammer that straight out of the park. And one example after the other, they do that, laying out this argument for the basic decency, or at least equality of decency and equivalence of sinfulness between men and women. And it's not just that women are bad and they spoil men. She does this in a number of ways that are really quite ingenious. Number one, arguing in that legal framework makes it all sound very logical and appeals to the same kind of logical, rhetorically trained people who work in a royal administration. So she is speaking their language to try and motivate them a little, to try and sway them. She is addressing a specifically Christian audience, and she references at the very beginning, she knows that everybody else has got lots of examples throughout history of from culture of women being nasty and polluting men, starting with Adam and Eve. Eve made Adam eat the fruit that got them kicked out of the Garden of Eden. How do you refute that? How do you challenge that? Well, again, not quite in that book, but in the full work, she actually references herself after Lady Reason and the other two have said, well, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this, we will show you the error in your thinking that leads you to buy into all these lies you've been told. Christine says, well, okay, make me your handmaiden. Handmaiden is a direct reference. I forget the full line she uses, and I'm not going to look it up here, but it's a direct reference to the Virgin Mary in the Annunciation scene, when the angel comes down from God to announce that she will, while still a virgin, she will give birth to Jesus Christ. And she says, make me your handmaiden to the angel. Use me as you will. So in a very deft rhetorical move right there, Christine invokes Mary, who is no small slouch on the Catholic hierarchy, and people have to take her as like, well, okay, yes, all women are awful, but Mary gets a pass. So she starts off there. Little signals, again, little things that she says, that she writes, throws off exactly what she's driving at here. And they're easy to miss, but they're always percolating underneath the underneath the surface. The in chapter 2 of the first part, she specifically calls out she specifically calls out the habit of, or the practice of disagreeing with the ancients, because people will justify what they do based on, well, it's always been done this way. And you go back far enough into history, you realize that those great people, our forebears, are the esteemed members of the founding fathers of our whatever, of our people. They thought this, and you can't say they're wrong about anything, because, you know, when you're really old, that means you're really smart. And she takes that and just spins it around a little. She points out, in fact, they are all constantly correcting each other's opinions, as you yourself should know from reading Aristotle's Metaphysics, where he discusses and refutes both their views and those of Plato and other philosophers. Don't forget the doctors of the church either, and St. Augustine in particular, who all took issue with Aristotle himself on certain matters. Raising all of these authorities that have been cited in the past and pointing out how they really come about and correct one another, point out how each other is wrong. Plato says something, and then Aristotle, his student, comes along and says, nah, not so much, not so much. You got some things wrong there. And even an esteemed figure like Aristotle, who was a giant throughout the Middle Ages, comes under some review by Augustine. St. Augustine goes and says, well, yes, Aristotle, he's a few little things wrong, just little problems here and there. She's arguing for looking new at the evidence for yourself. You seem to have accepted the philosopher's views as articles of faith, and thus as irrefutable as on every point. So just setting that up there, positing that, okay, you're putting too much faith in what is established. You're putting too much faith in the authority structure as it is, the authority structure that is keeping women down. So, they start off on this mission to build a city. And here it's a little bit clunky. The idea of building a city is meant to be a metaphor. And the Middle Ages loves, again, its metaphors and its convoluted imagery. The city of ladies is reminiscent of Thomas Aquinas and the city of God. You're building something imaginary in your mind as a place of refuge from the corrupt nature of humanity. But again, she argues on very specific points here. Think about what a city in this era, or going back to the ancient era, is. It's a place where people come together to be protected. A city generally has walls, a city generally has a gate, and it is usually more like a fort to protect the people inside from people outside. The female sex has been left defenseless for a long time now. This is chapter 3. Like the orchard without a wall, and bereft of a champion to take up arms in order to protect it. Indeed, this has become This is because those trusty knights who should by right defend women who have been negligent in their duty and lacking in vigilance, leaving womankind open to attack from all sides. It's no wonder that women have been the losers in this war against them, since the envious slanderers and the vicious traitors who criticize them have been allowed to aim all manner of weapons at their defenseless targets. Even the strongest city will fall if there's no one to defend it, and even the most undeserving case will win if there's no one to testify against it. Out of the goodness and simplicity of their hearts, women have trusted in God and have patiently endured the countless verbal and written assaults that have been unjustly and shamelessly launched upon them. Now, however, it is time for them to be delivered out of the hands of Pharaoh. Just look at that. Again, she can make her case any number of different ways, and she's very much making a case here. This is a lawyerly way to speak. But she is arguing on, well, explicitly judicial or juridical bounds. She's arguing like a lawyer. She is using military and biblical terms. She is arguing on the grounds that the people around her would be familiar with. She is surrounded by the leaders of a country, people who move armies here and there, people who have direct contact with the Vatican and argue about matters of religious practice on a very regular basis. She is arguing on their turf and turning it against them. This is genius. If you want to convince someone of something, you don't just make them come to you and accept all of your premises and the way you frame your arguments. No, if you want to convince someone of something, you make it on their terms. That's what she's doing here. She is speaking very much like a king. The one other thing I will point out, one of the objections that Christine in the story, or in the little drama that's playing out, makes to Lady Reason is that, well, all this is very well and good, but women aren't even allowed to talk in court. We're not allowed to have access to courts of law. We have no standing. We have no right to speak in court. We have no rights. So why should we bother thinking about things in that way? And Lady Reason responds, "But, dear Christine, to come back to your question, you might as well ask why God didn't command men to perform women's tasks and women those of men. In answer, one could say that just as a wide and prudent lord organizes his household into different domains and operates a strict division of labor amongst his workforce, so God created man and woman to serve him in different ways and to help and comfort one another according to a similar division of labor. To this end, he endowed each sex with qualities and attributes which they need to perform the task for which they are cut out, even though sometimes humankind fails to respect these distinctions. God gave men strong, powerful bodies to stride about and to speak boldly, which explains why it is men who learn the law and practice the rule of justice. In those instances where someone refuses to uphold the law which has been established by right, men must enforce it through the use of arms and physical strength, which women clearly could not do." So there, she's defending the distinction between the sexes. She's not arguing that we're all the same. She is trimming her sails a little bit here. She's still arguing in a very, in an idiom and in terms that would be familiar to high-ranking administrators, talking about workforces and stuff like that. Chapter 15. Semiramis was a truly heroic woman who excelled in the practice and pursuit of arms. Because of her great military prowess, the people of the time, who were all pagans, said that she was so invincible both on land and sea that she must be the sister of the great god Jupiter and the daughter of the old god Saturn, whom they regarded as the rulers of those two domains. Clearly, we have another example of appealing to the military here. She is another queen who rules in her husband's stead. We see when Semiramis was still quite young, it so happened that her husband Ninus was killed by an arrow during an assault on a city. So Semiramis was ruling in the place of her deceased husband. Much like Christine was functioning in place of her deceased husband, much like Queen Isabeau was functioning in place of her missing husband. So there's a little selection there. Plus, Semiramis is not generally, well, it's not a figure that is particularly familiar today, but she's a legendary figure that had some common familiarity throughout the Middle Ages as a queen of Babylon who was not always the nicest. Even Christine notes that, well, yeah, she could be a little cruel sometimes, but let's not just say that, well, she was cruel because other military leaders were just as cruel, but we say that they were heroic. We say that they were valiant, that they were great warriors. Why can't we say the same about Queen Semiramis? Now, significantly, Semiramis is most famous for marrying her own son. Less savory aspect of her biography, let's say. So, there's a serious morality question there. We are told very explicitly that she was a pagan before Christ. So there's that. And in the end of this chapter, Christine does some tap dancing to try and make it seem like she was a little bit that her portrayal as grossly immoral is inadequate. It's true that some authors have criticized Semiramis, and rightly so, if she had been a Christian, for having married her own son, for whom she had borne to her husband, the Lord Ninus. Yet she had two main reasons for doing so. Firstly, she wanted no other crowned lady to share her empire with her, as would have been the case if her son had married another woman. And secondly, in her opinion, no other man than her son was worthy of her. Okay. That sounds like a stretch. I think here Christine is clearly yada-yada-ing incest, which, even in the ancient world was kind of a no-no. But it is asking you to take a different perspective, saying, well, you can't hold her to Christian morality. We got to look at it from a different frame. Obviously, also that idea of the woman with a young child ruling and not wanting to give up the power to the young child, that would resonate with the Queen of France, for whom Christine was writing. But significantly also, this is another rhetorical trick. If your argument is that, well, stories from the ancient era through today always have a bias against women and portray them in the most immoral, unflattering, awful terms, why would you start off talking about a woman who is known for slaughter on the battlefield and incest in the bedroom? That's a tough example to sell the idea of morality. Why would you do that? Well, we're back to rhetoric, which is the art of persuasive speaking. In law school, of which I did not go, but I've heard good things, they teach you about evidence. And when your opposite side has some pretty compelling evidence that you know is going to put your side in a bad light, it behooves you to present that evidence yourself in a more complimentary light before the opposite side has the chance to do so. They call this pulling the poison, where you get the chance to introduce the shocking new evidence, but do it in a way that, makes it seem not so bad. And that way, the surprise factor that your opponent had counted on is sort of gone. You took all the wind out of his sails. That was his big moment, and you just took it away from him. You pulled the poison. Christine, in putting this as her very first example, is doing exactly that. She's saying, okay, yeah, this is the worst example of immorality you will find. But I'm going to put it right up front, and I'm going to put a positive spin on it. Because otherwise, you could go on and talk about, Mary, the mother of Jesus, all day long, and in the back of your readers' minds, they're all going to be thinking, yeah, but what about Semiramis? What about that one? And once that doubt takes root, they're going to dispel all your evidence. So here you get it out of the way right up front. Take control. It's a very aggressive move in argument. Again, aggression is a kind of masculine trait that Christine is adopting to speak to these very macho dudes running the country. She knows how to speak guy. And you get more horrible stories about the Amazons, about what fierce warriors they are. We're told that they were only defeated by Hercules and Theseus, two of the great heroes of Greek renown, because nobody else could take down an army of women but the greatest heroes of the Greek legends. But even that, we are told that after they had been conquered, they gussied themselves up, and Hercules and Theseus were suddenly so taken with them, so beguiled by how lovely they looked. So they didn't win on the battlefield, but they won in the bedroom. There's always a kind of conquest where Theseus and Hercules are just a couple of horny brutes who say, oh, wow, I've been out fighting for a while, but damn, she's pretty. And I'll go fall for that. But the women are always in control. The story of the Amazon queen Penthesilea is a rewriting or an addendum to the Iliad. It's a rewriting of the Trojan War. This huge monument to established culture, to the established patriarchal culture. The kind of thing that everybody in her circle would cite as an authority. And she's saying, yeah, but all that stuff about Hector and Achilles, that's great, but you know, there was another great warrior that day. Let's hear about her story. Let's add her to the picture. More military, more blood and guts, speaking their language, but expanding the scope of what it can mean. From there, they talk about, well, okay, enough of all the battles, enough of all the fighting. What about, what about the smart stuff? Are there any great scholars among women? Women, their brains are soft. That's science. We know it. They can't think. So Christine goes again one depth deeper and says, well, yeah, okay. Women, in fact, are the foundation of knowledge. Because it is a woman or a female character, the noble Nicostrata, who invents the Latin alphabet, through which all of the men sitting around the French court with Christine would have been educated, and through which all of the wisdom of the ancients would have been communicated to them. So everything that they have learned from books that they keep pointing to and saying, look, it always says again and again and again that guys are smarter. And she's saying, yeah, but you wouldn't have that at all if it wasn't for the woman. She points to Minerva, another name for Athena, and credits her with creating Greek letters and numbers. She points to the goddess, Ceres, the goddess of grain, and says that, well, yeah, without her, we'd still be just out, hunting and gathering, living in the woods like crude animals. But instead, Ceres, the goddess of grain, taught us how to farm, how to cultivate, how to bring science and knowledge to the production of food, which allowed civilization, which is effectively what we saw Shamhat doing with Gilgamesh, introducing him to bread and beer as civilization. We get another emphasis on Nicostrata, sometimes now called Carmentis, in a celebration of just language itself, not just the alphabet, but what words can do. One could sum up by saying, and this is book 30 or chapter 37, one could sum up by saying that the good things that this Carmentis has done are truly infinite, since it is thanks to her that men have been brought out of their ignorant state and become civilized. Even if they themselves have not acknowledged this fact, thanks to her, men possess the art of encoding their thoughts and wishes into secret messages, writing, which they can send all over the world. They have the means to make their desires known and understood by others, and they have access to knowledge of past and present events, as well as to some aspects of the future. Moreover, thanks to this lady's invention, men can draw up treaties and strike up friendships with people in faraway places. Through their correspondences back and forth, they can get to know each other without ever meeting face to face. In short, it is impossible to count up all the advantages that the invention of the alphabet has brought. It is writing which allows us to describe and to know God's will, to understand celestial matters, the sea, the earth, all individuals and all objects. I ask you then, Was there ever a man who did more good than this? It's a fair question. Obviously, she's still speaking in military terms, about drawing up treaties. All you guys clustered around the king, you're always dumping on me all day. You draw up treaties. Do you thank the goddess, or do you thank women for that invention, for that ability? And also note how it is celebrating, this passage is celebrating the art of writing and reading, of literacy as a strength and a crucial aspect of statecraft. And what is Christine's skill that she's selling here? Writing. Always advertising her own crucial skill set. Because without that, all of those friends from far away wouldn't be friends anymore, and maybe they would come and attack us. The final figures that she deals with, particularly Dido and Lavinia, are two characters from Roman legend, and specifically the poem by the poet Virgil, the Aeneid, which is about the founding of Rome. And Dido is a major character in the beginning of that poem as a queen of Carthage, modern day roughly Libya, who had come from Phoenicia. She had been a fugitive out of Phoenicia, settled in Carthage, built a great civilization, and then Aeneas, a Roman soldier after the fall of Troy, or a Trojan soldier after the fall of Troy, came ashore there as a refugee with a small army, and they fell in love, yada, yada, yada. He abandoned her, she killed herself. She has since then been a kind of poster child for the irrational women who take breakups the wrong way. And she set fire to her house by burning herself alive. And through that destroyed relationship, unleashed the enmity between Rome as a civilization and Carthage as its mortal rival. That's that. That is not really addressed in this. Dido surfaces in book 2, where he goes into it a little bit more, but she just yada yadas this again. We don't hear about the negative parts. We hear about her being a refugee from Phoenicia, a foreigner setting up and ruling in a land when her husband has died. Again, that dynamic. Waving to Queen Isabeau, how we ladies gotta stick together. And Lavinia is essentially the same. A character also from the second half of the Aeneid, and who ruled for a time after her husband's death, and in place of her son, and or working out a détente among rival factions in the early Roman civilization. We're told, vowing never to marry again. Christine is always very big on don't force women to marry again. Lavinia conducted herself with exemplary good judgment in her widowhood and managed to keep the kingdom intact thanks to her astuteness. She was able to win her stepson's affection and thus diffuse any animosity on his part towards her or his stepbrother. Indeed, once he had finished building the city of Alba, Ascanius left to make his home there, and that just goes into more legends about the founding of Rome. But you see there a figure who is manipulating the domestic sphere of rivalry between her stepson and her own son, who are both necessarily candidates for succeeding their father in power. And that could break out into an ugly war right there. But she diffuses that. She bridges that. She exercises her power, her authority, her ability to talk in feminine, domestic ways, bringing people together as a uniter, to diffuse great battles that could have destroyed the Roman civilization at its start. Now, this is going to have special precedence for France, because France became part of the Roman Empire, and so they see a real affinity to that. The French generally traced their lineage from Aeneas as well in legend, so they all feel that sort of analogy having direct consequence for them. But again and again and again, you can see Christine bringing up these examples as not just making the case that women are strong, women are smart, women are prudent and have good judgment. She's making that case, but in the subtext, she's also making the case that she, Christine, is a valuable and invaluable member of their society. And if she, as an individual, can have that kind of value, maybe others can too. She never makes that explicit. And in the sequel to this book, she comes out with a second book that same year, generally goes under the title of The Treasure of Ladies, Le Trésor de la Cité des Dames, also sometimes titled Les Livres des Trois Vertus, the Books of the Three Virtues. It backpedals a little bit, quite frankly. It makes some excuses and says, well, no, women should be prudent and not challenge their roles in society. They should just try and function within those roles to the best of their ability. It's sort of the 1-2 punch. She's more aggressive in this book, but then she comes out very quickly with a sequel that says, yes, but not so much. Let's just keep everything nice and peaceful. But she's already introduced the idea into the water. She's already brought that out for people to start to think about. And to this day, lots of people still read this book. Very few people read that second book. Maybe she knew that would happen. I don't know. But through a very, very determined and ingenious argument, she makes the case that women have been unfairly maligned in literature and culture throughout history. That they are not all evil, they are not all weak or weak-minded or unreliable. They are every bit as strong and as weak as men. And that's the essential dynamic that is so revolutionary for its time. The ability to look at an inherited tradition, an inherited way of seeing things, and say, well, let's just think about that. Let's not take Aristotle and the Bible and St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. Let's not take all of them just, automatically as truth. Let's think about it. Let's break it down. Let's read more closely between the lines and figure out what the real truth is for ourselves. Using our God-given gift to think, our God-given gift of reason, turned towards the intricacies of God's universe. This is the essential dynamic of what will become the European Renaissance, which is already percolating when Christine is writing this. The essence of thinking for yourself and not just trusting what everybody tells you is the truth.